Hey guys, after almost 5 years, the Horror Man is back. Well, what can I say, guys? It's been a long time, but it feels great to be back. I appreciate everybody who watched my teasers. Posted those recently, as you guys know. Got a lot of good feedback from that, which is great. Been meaning to come back for a while, but you know how it is. Life gets in the way. You know, there's a lot of changes since I've been gone. As I said, it's been almost 5 years since my last video. I believe it was June or July of 2013 was the last time I posted a video other than the teasers that I just mentioned. And a lot has definitely changed, you know, both for me and the YouTube community, apparently. Glad to see there are still some people who are still making videos, and I've been trying to catch up on some of those and making comments, so some of you will see that. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are missing. You know, where did everybody go? What happened? I know when I left, there was the buyout, you know, Google buying out YouTube, so a lot of people were talking about not liking the changes and giving it up and that sort of thing, but you know, I think it's time for everybody to come back, you know? So anybody you know who used to be part of this YouTube community, you know, I'm friends with a bunch of people on my Facebook, you know, hoping to get them back in the game. Let's get this thing going again. Let's rebuild this YouTube horror community. You know, it was a great pastime for a lot of us a few years back, and I really enjoyed making videos and seeing everybody else's and participating in challenges and all that sort of thing. So, you know, I definitely think we need to bring that back. So for me, as for my changes, first thing you'll know, since you guys are used to kind of seeing my hand, is got a ring on it now. Yep, so that happened. Been married almost 4 years now. It'll be 4 years in October. And being the Horror Man, of course, I had some horror elements added to my wedding, including an Evil Dead cake. You guys know I love Evil Dead, so I'll include a picture of that Evil Dead cake here. But yeah, between getting married and, you know, hanging out with my son, working, it's just, as I said, life gets in the way. But glad to be back. Don't want to ramble on for too long. For those of you who, you know, are a follower of mine who used to watch my videos, you can expect a lot of the same types of videos I used to post. And for any newcomers, any new viewers, basically what I like to show is, you know, my horror DVDs, my horror Blu-rays. I'll be throwing some horror VHS in here as well. You know, I kind of focus on obscure stuff sometimes, or rare discs or rare tapes, that sort of thing. I'll definitely be doing some movie reviews, some rankings. You know, I'll do my cover art comparison videos. Bunch of stuff coming. I pretty much collect all things horror. I've been collecting horror comics, horror books, and of course horror movies. So a lot of the same for those of you who are used to my old videos, and for those of you new, I appreciate your viewership. I appreciate you liking my videos, following, all that sort of thing. So definitely subscribe to me. So for this first video back, I figured there's no better way than maybe to do a top 20 of my favorite horror films. You know, this is something that always changes. I know for a lot of us, I'm sure you'll all agree, it's really hard to kind of pin down your top 20 horror movies, especially when you're a big fan of the genre. It was definitely tough to do this, and I'm really not completely satisfied with my list, but as of today, this is going to be my top 20. So I figured this is a good way for, again for everybody to kind of see what I'm into. So if you are a new viewer, you can kind of see my taste in horror by seeing my top 20 horror movies of all time. So again, I'm not completely satisfied with this top 20, but it is what it is. And again, it changes pretty much day to day, week to week, month to month. You guys know how it is. I'm sure I'll update this list eventually as we go on. I have plans to do a top 20 slasher video coming up soon as well, so that'll just be slasher films since it's my favorite subgenre of horror. But getting into my top 20, I'm going to start at 20, move my way up to 1, you know, my favorite horror film of all time. I did make the rule of including no sequels whatsoever. No sequels, no remakes. So if there may be something, you know, for example, if I tend to like a sequel more than the original film, neither may not even be on this list. I don't know. I really don't know how to explain it, but it's my list, and those are just kind of the rules that I made. Later on, you know, on my channel, I'm definitely going to be doing some some sequel videos, maybe talking about my favorite horror sequels in a series, as well as my least favorite sequels, so I really didn't want to include sequels on this list. So getting into the countdown now, my top 20 horror films of all time. Number 20 is Creepshow. Now, I'm a huge fan of Stephen King. I pretty much have a Stephen King library in my house. I needed to include something Stephen King on this list. And I also love horror anthology films. I find that they tend to go by pretty fast. You know, with the short stories within the movie, they're pretty quick paced. Even for a movie like this that's 2 hours long, you would never guess it is 2 hours long, because, you know, as one story starts, you know, after 10-15 minutes, you move on to a new story. Same thing, you know, it kind of continues on. Some longer than others, obviously. You know, the crate tends to go on a little bit longer than the rest of them. But, you know, just definitely had to include this. Again, I love horror anthologies, and I love Stephen King. So, Creepshow, my number 20. Next up, I found it hard not to include this movie in my top 20 horror films of all time, and that's The Silence of the Lambs. I mean, come on, it's the only horror film to ever win the Best Picture Oscar. How could I not include it? Hannibal Lecter is an icon. Buffalo Bill, for that matter, is an icon. Just a genuinely creepy movie. Great acting all around, and just some really classic stuff in here. So, Silence of the Lambs, number 19. Before I go into number 18, you know, let me make it clear again that this is my personal favorite top 20 horror films. So I know people are going to disagree that I didn't include some big titles in here. And again, this is my personal preference, so I know you're going to disagree with me, but you know, that's the fun of it. You know, we're all collectors, we're all movie fans, we're all horror fans, so we're all going to have our own personal tastes. With that being said, at number 18 is a Rob Zombie film, and is House of a Thousand Corpses. Now, I know Rob Zombie has some really big die-hard fans, and then there's other horror fans who really don't like any of his work. I tend to be a fan of Rob Zombie. I don't think there's a film that he made that I really don't like. This, though, is my favorite of them all. It was the first horror film that he directed, and I remember watching it for the first time and really being blown away by it. Love the atmosphere. You know, I love the characters. It was pretty much of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, version for the modern age, in my opinion. You know, same type of style. People getting stranded on the side of the road, you know, ending up in a creepy old house with a very sadistic family. Just really love this one all around. Some really classic characters. I love the Halloween feel to it. I think it has a great Halloween atmosphere. It actually takes place, you know, that time of year. The kids are trick-or-treating on October 30th, I remember in the movie, because October 31st fell on a weeknight. Always thought that was kind of funny, but I do love that Halloween atmosphere, and House of a Thousand Corpses is my number 18 favorite horror film of all time. Number 17 on my list is one of the very first slashers ever made. Not the first, but one of the first. And it is Black Christmas. Now, I love all things horror, I love all things Halloween, but I also love all things Christmas, and this is my favorite holiday-themed horror film. And the reason I say that is because this one just gets the contrast right. You know, that Christmas atmosphere, the Christmas decorations, the Christmas music, along with the sinister killer in this one, it just really gets it right for me. For anybody who has seen it, you know, without giving out spoilers, there's that classic scene with one of the characters being murdered by a glass statue while carolers basically sing Christmas carols outside the house. And I just love that scene. Again, it's a great contrast of what should be a joyous time of year while everybody's pretty much getting killed off one by one. So, Black Christmas, number 17 in my top 20. Next up is one that I'm sure is on most people's top 20 list of horror films, and it is A Nightmare on Elm Street. How could you not include this? And what can I say that hasn't been said before? You got the first appearance, obviously, of Freddy Krueger. Basically a supernatural slasher film, if you will. You know, a slasher who could kill you while you sleep. It's terrifying when you think about it. I mean, you can't live without sleeping, and there's just no way to avoid it. So, I don't know. It's A Nightmare on Elm Street. How could I not include it on my top 20? Now, number 15 on my list is probably a movie that most people wouldn't have on their top 20 horror films. But for me, it's just nostalgic. It's a movie I grew up watching. It's a movie I love. It's not that scary, but it's very, very entertaining. And definitely a movie I can watch over and over again and never get tired of watching. And that movie is Tremors. I love Kevin Bacon in this. Love Fred Ward. Kind of love that it's a buddy movie within a monster film. Just really enjoy it. I love the monsters in here. I love the, the graboids, and got some cool death scenes. Just a really fun movie. This right here is the 4-pack, but I'm really talking about Tremors 1 here, the original. So yeah. Also want to mention, some of the DVDs, Blu-rays, even VHS you'll be seeing in this video. I kind of just grabbed the most convenient copy I could find in my collection. Some of my stuff isn't organized right now. The shelves are kind of backed into other shelves and so forth. So I kind of just grabbed, one copy that I could find of each of these films. I do have, other versions of these movies. Anybody who's watched my old videos know I tend to collect multiple copies of different films. So, I probably have the same movie on DVD, on Blu-ray, or even on VHS. I know I have the Graboid edition of Tremors, the 4-pack of all 4 movies. That set as well. Some of the other movies I've shown, I have a couple different copies of Black Christmas and that sort of thing. So just wanted to throw that out there. Number 14 on my list is a very creepy movie. I absolutely love the setting in this one. It really just adds to it, and that is Candyman. Love Candyman. He's a great killer, definitely a great villain, and in a way you kind of feel for him. If you've seen the movie, you probably know what I mean. Just overall, great film. I love Clive Barker. Clive Barker, who was the writer of this. He wrote the novella that Candyman was based on. You can tell it's got Clive Barker written all over it. But Bernard Rose did a great job with the direction of this film. Again, love the setting of this one. Love Tony Todd as Candyman, and also has a great ending. Number 13 is another movie I grew up watching. May not necessarily be on a lot of people's top 20 lists, but then again, I could be wrong because it does have a pretty big fan base. And that movie is The Lost Boys. It's another movie I can watch over and over again and really never get tired of watching. Just love it. It's a great vampire film. Probably my favorite Joel Schumacher film. Got some great vampires in here, with Kiefer Sutherland. I like the way they look, No sparkling vampires in this one. Really enjoy The Lost Boys. Number 12 is one of my favorite Halloween-themed horror films, and it's sort of like an anthology, but not quite, because they all sort of connect, and it's all kind of one timeline. It doesn't really jump from story to story, but then again it does. You guys will know what I mean. It's Trick or Treat. Love this film. Again, it just really gets that Halloween atmosphere right. If you guys aren't used to watching my videos, you'll know that I'm a big fan of atmosphere. If a movie has a good atmosphere and has not so great acting, I kind of forgive it a little bit because the atmosphere is really what draws me in. This just gets Halloween right. I just love it. It has something for everybody. It has a vampire, it has werewolves, it has ghost story, has sort of a slasher in there as well. So it just has it all. If you like any of those things and you haven't checked out Trick or Treat already, which I'm not sure why you wouldn't have, definitely give it a watch. It's a great movie to watch right on Halloween. Number 11 on my list is another horror film that has a little bit of everything, something for everyone, and that is The Cabin in the Woods. If you've seen this movie, again, you know what I'm talking about. The big climax scene alone is worth watching this film. But again, it's another movie that kind of, it knows what it's doing. Think of Scream in a way. Kind of tongue-in-cheek, almost makes fun of itself in a way. It's kind of a movie about horror movies. And I really enjoyed that. This was really well done. This movie was put off kind of like Trick or Treat for a long time. It was made and then a couple of years went by without a release. Again, just like Trick or Treat. And when it finally did come out in theaters, I was there to see it. And I have to say I was definitely blown away. Saw this one in theaters and was glad that I did. Love Cabin in the Woods. We've made it to the top 10. And coming in at number 10 is another Wes Craven film. And it is Scream. Now this here is another box set. As you can see, it has Scream, Scream 2 and Scream 3, and also 2 documentaries, but I'm talking about the original Scream. I was there opening night to see it. It's the film that revitalized the slasher genre. Absolutely love this one. I'll never forget the experience opening night sitting there watching this 22 years ago. Let that sink in that this film is that old. It's just as great now as it was back then. Absolutely love this film. Kevin Williamson wrote it. Wes Craven directed it. So just a great whodunit slasher film. You're thinking it's one person, then you're thinking somebody else is the killer, then you're thinking it's that first person again. Just great. It's definitely, I think, the best slasher film to do that, to keep you guessing. If you had asked me a few years back where this would be in my top 20, I probably would have had it a bit higher, but who knows? You know, my opinion on this is always changing, I guess. But either way, Scream, number 10 in my top 20 horror films of all time. Number 9 on my list is another one that probably would have been higher a few years back. And in fact, I know that it would have been because at one time I considered it, you know, probably in my top 3 favorite horror films of all time. And that movie is Nightbreed. So we get another Clive Barker film here. This one he actually directed and he wrote. I just always love this. You know, it's a great monster movie, but it's also a bit deeper than that. You know, not too deep, but the fact is, you know, in this one, the monsters are really the heroes in a sense, and people and society are the actual monsters. It's a good movie. I recently watched the director's cut extended version. Finally, the Scream Factory Blu-ray release, which I pretty much ordered the day you could pre-order it, and it arrived early and all that, and I was excited to watch it, and didn't get around to it for probably over a year or two whenever it came out. Only just recently watched that one. After years and years of waiting for that cut, it took me very long to watch it, but glad that I did. It's a lot closer to the book Cabal, which it is based on. Favorite book of mine as well, so if you're into reading horror stuff as well, check out Cabal by Clive Barker. It's a great read. It's basically a Nightbreed with a lot more added to it. It's basically the director's cut of Nightbreed. But this, of course, is the theatrical version just because it's on VHS here. I remember renting this movie a lot as a kid. Always enjoyed this one. Again, great characters here, and I love Nightbreed. Number 8 on my top 20 horror films of all time is a John Carpenter film, and it is The Fog. Now, along with this being one of my favorite horror films of all time, this has one of my favorite horror soundtracks of all time. One of the greatest horror scores in history. I just absolutely love it. Again, I'm going to say that magic word again, atmosphere. It's all about the atmosphere in this one. You got Jamie Lee Curtis, which is always great, you know, in the 80s and in 80s horror films. You know, it's pretty much a nice ghost/zombie story, I guess you can call it. I'm sure most of you have seen it. But again, it's really all about the atmosphere and the score in this one. It's just a great movie, and it's just one that I revisit often. Number 7 is one that I guarantee you will see on my favorite slasher films of all time video, and that movie is Sleepaway Camp. Is this possibly my favorite slasher film of all time? Maybe. I guess you'll have to check out that video when I get around to filming it to find out. But just love this one. It has everything that you could want in a slasher film. It just really does. I don't know how else to describe it. Has that great ending, of course, that everybody talks about. Has some great kill scenes in there. A great antagonist. Also has a lot of comedy. A lot of that cheesy comedy that's actually genuinely funny. You know, some slasher films have that comedy in there, but it's just kind of over the top, too cheesy. I feel like this has a great balance of what works and what doesn't. You're laughing in some parts, and then in other parts you're kind of trying to figure out who the killer is, the first time you watch it anyway. And you're kind of taking in all the gore and enjoying that as well. So it really has a good balance of comedy and just that cheesy goodness that a slasher film needs. So Sleepaway Camp, number 7. Number 6, we've reached another Clive Barker film, and this one is probably his most famous of all, and that is Hellraiser. Not much that I can say about this one. It's another classic. You know, I mean, there was pretty much nothing like it, I think, when this one came out. It's definitely different. I've also read The Hellbound Heart, again by Clive Barker, the short story or novella that this movie is based on. Again, if you're into reading and you like horror, then, I mean, of course you like horror, you're watching my videos right now, but then definitely check out The Hellbound Heart. It's a great read, and again, it's a little bit different than the movie version, but you can definitely see that the movie was pulled, you know, directly from the book. So yeah, number 6 is Hellraiser. Next week, they'll actually be releasing the 10th Hellraiser film, Hellraiser Judgment. I know some people have already done reviews. They've gotten review copies. But it officially hits shelves next week, so I'll be sure to check that one out. We've now reached the top 5, my top 5 favorite horror films of all time. Some people may be surprised about this one, you know, making it into the top 5, but I love this film. I don't know what to say. And it is Dolls. I love this movie. I just do. I don't know it's amazing. I'll say it again. Atmosphere. It gets the atmosphere right. You know, it takes place on the longest night of the year. You know, so they say in the movie. It's just my favorite doll movie, my favorite killer toy movie. It's about 78 minutes long, I believe, which is very short for a movie, and it just flies by. It kind of starts off right away. Got some classic scenes in there. Another great score, and just a great movie all around. So Dolls, my number 5 in my top 20 horror films of all time. Number 4 on my list needs no introduction, and it is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. I mean, when you're talking horror films, how could you not include this one? It is just an absolute classic. It's Hitchcock, it's Janet Leigh. It's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. It's one of those films that, you know, you don't watch it for a while and you kind of forget how great it is, and then you revisit it and realize, wow, it really is an absolute masterpiece. Again, it's one of the first slasher films of all time. Number 2, in my opinion, not my number 2 favorite, but the second slasher film ever made, with Peeping Tom being number 1, being released just shortly before this one. But again, it really was the foundation of the slasher genre. A lot of movies, a lot of horror films borrowed from this one after that, and it is definitely my favorite Hitchcock film. So, Psycho, you know, come on. I mean, again, how can you just not include this? Anthony Perkins is phenomenal as Norman Bates, and Norman Bates is definitely one of the greatest horror villains of all time. We've made it to the top 3 now, and some of you might know where this is going. My number 3 favorite horror film of all time is Halloween. It's John Carpenter, it's Michael Myers, it's Jamie Lee Curtis, it's Donald Pleasance. It is Halloween. How could you not have Halloween in your top horror films of all time? It is just a classic, an absolute masterpiece, one of the greatest horror films of all time, possibly one of the greatest films of all time, and to not include it in my top 3 would be an insult. So there it is, my number 3 favorite horror film of all time, John Carpenter's Halloween. It's 2 left. Number 2 in my top 20 favorite horror films of all time is Phantasm. I love this movie. I can't say that enough. I grew up watching this one. It's very different. I mean, it's definitely a horror film, obviously, but it's just, I really don't know how to explain it. I don't know how anybody really could. You know, most of us here and most of you watching are probably horror fans, so you've probably seen the movie. It's just fantastic, and it's one of those series where I really have a hard time determining which is my favorite in the series. All right, Ravager's probably on the bottom of that, but I've also only seen it once, and gotta kind of cut it some slack. You know, it took a while to put that one out, and I'm just glad that we got it, so I don't want to disrespect that film at all. But I mean, this is the original here. It's classic, you know, straight from 1979, and it holds up today. I just absolutely love Phantasm. I love everything about this series. I love the tall man. I love Reggie. I love Mike. I love Jody. I love the lady in lavender. I love it all. I love Phantasm. But there is one horror film that I like just slightly more than this. You guys already know my favorite horror film of all time, The Evil Dead. It is just the perfect example of a horror film. It's got gore, it's got the, you know, young people going into the woods and going into a cabin and doing something they're not supposed to be doing. It has demonic creatures and over-the-top gore. I mean, I know I've already said that word, but the gore in this film is absolutely phenomenal. I love the practical effects. I love what Raimi did. I love what Bruce Campbell did. Bruce Campbell as Ash is an absolute icon, as you guys know from my YouTube profile picture. I love everything Evil Dead. For those of you who have watched my videos in the past, you know that's kind of my pride and joy in my collection is my Evil Dead collection. I just think it really encapsulates what horror is. You know, it's just that cabin in the woods. It's the first cabin in the woods. It's don't read something you're not supposed to read. Don't touch something you're not supposed to touch. You know, don't summon demons to possess your friends. That's pretty much it. It's the basic horror film. It has everything you could want in horror, and The Evil Dead is my number 1 favorite horror film of all time. Well guys, there it is. my first video back after almost 5 years. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, I thought it would just be a good video to come back to, you know, talking about my top 20 favorite horror films of all time. I could talk about these films forever, but I really didn't want this video to be too long. You know, all this time away and then I come back with an hour-long video would have been pretty ridiculous. So hopefully you guys stuck in there and watched this to the end. I got a lot of videos coming up. I have a lot of ideas for videos, and I'm just really glad to be back. You know, please spread the word. And again, if you're watching this and you no longer make videos, please come back. Let's rebuild this horror community. You know, it would mean a lot to me. I just think it's time. We had a lot of fun in the past. We can have a lot more fun in the future. Please keep checking back regularly. I will be posting new videos. I got some rare stuff to post soon. Again, I'll be doing more lists, some movie reviews, all that sort of stuff. But thanks for watching, guys. Please like, subscribe if you haven't. This has been The Horror Man, and I'm glad to be back. Thanks, guys.